Sales objections are probably one of the most challenging parts of our sales day. Hi, my name is Bill Rice and I'm with Age Lead Store, and today we're going to talk about 8 common sales objections and tips for overcoming them. All that and more on this episode. Stay tuned. Okay, today we're going to talk about common sales objections, and we're going to really focus on kind of 8 general types and strategies for overcoming them. Whenever I teach objections or overcoming objections, I like to focus kind of on the strategies of more general scenarios versus kind of the kind of one-liner scripted version of objectives, because I think it defeats some of the main sort of the fundamental strategy of how to overcome these objections. So let's take a look at my slides, and we're going to kind of move through each of these objections, and you're going to get a sense of more of a strategy versus a script for overcoming these objections, which will make you far more versatile and ability to kind of overcome more types of objections. So let's take a look. All right, the first and most common is, of course, the price objection. You're too expensive, or I can't afford this. There's a variety of different ways that this shows up. So oftentimes what actually is happening here is there's not necessarily a product or a value to market fit. So your product or your service is not necessarily matching up to what they need in the market, or potentially the level or the maturity of their business and the ability to kind of afford the strategy or the product that you're offering them in the market. So let's take a look at that. Potentially, like I said, you could be in the wrong market. You maybe are not actually communicating the value in a way that they actually think about value or translate it internally. So whenever you're talking about pricing and that sort of thing, you have to understand, or through your line of dialogue, you have to start to understand what exactly they value and kind of the economics of their business. How does it work? How do they make money? What are the margins? All those kind of questions can start to give you an understanding of what they value, and that way you can align your product or your service with that particular sort of view of the world. Always lead with value. Before we kind of get to pricing, I like to ask a lot of questions about all those things I just talked about, how they value the business, the economics, so I can really start to get them thinking about, again, the value of their business, the way that they make money, and then potentially, as we talk through this process, they're going to start actually seeing and imagining how our product or service could help the things that they need to achieve in their business in order to increase revenue. All right, number 2 is the priority objection. And this is really kind of commonly sort of comes out as, hey, this isn't the right time, or it's not a priority, or we're not focused on this. And really, in order to kind of overcome this objection and make it a priority, is you have to, in your sales presentation, and again, in your line of questioning, it's so important to ask questions. Those are going to give you all of the fuel and the ammunition to overcome these objections. The more information you take in, the better you listen. You can start to pinpoint or zoom in on parts that will help you overcome these objections. In this case, you're looking for things that are going to create urgency for your product or your service in their business. One of the common ways to create urgency is just to, again, get them to tell you how much their time is worth and how much time they're potentially spending on things, marketing, sales, potentially maybe doing DIY. If you're selling a typical product, maybe they're doing a manual thing. If you're selling insurance or mortgages, like what is the cost of kind of continuing to shop around and essentially getting the same market pricing? What is the cost of sort of DIYing, selling your house in the case of a real estate deal? There's all kinds of different situations where you can get the client to start thinking thinking about the value of their time and how effective or efficient are they at offsetting kind of what you're proposing by the way that they're doing it now. So what is the value of their time? What is the cost or risk of not doing something? So potentially if you say, hey, this isn't a priority right now, or this isn't something I'm focused on, or I'm not thinking about buying a house right now, or yeah, I'm young, maybe I don't need my insurance yet, or I'm potentially, hey, I don't really need that marketing automation tool. The question is, if you don't do that, if you continue to kind of do what you're doing, what is the risk? What happens if something goes wrong? What happens if you don't actually improve this part of your business within the next 6 months or within a year? What exactly are the cost and risk of that? A lot of times there's lost revenue, there's potentially increased risk. What if something catastrophic happens? Potentially the market will change in the case of mortgages. If you're selling mortgages, like what is the risk of interest rates changing on you and potentially entirely changing your opportunity to buy a house or refinance your house? So there's always something, again, associated with either cost, lost revenue, or risk, just potentially the risk of losing something or cost or having to pay more in the future is the best way to kind of attack this one. And then, again, one of the things that I like to sort of put into my line of questioning is understanding how they get measured or how they kind of view themselves. So understanding the personal motivation inside of this deal and trying to get focused on that. What personally motivates them? So in the case of maybe B2B, you're trying to figure out, like, how do you get measured? If certain things happen right, or you hit certain metrics, or you make a certain quota or level, or you raise the business, or you roll out a new product line, what does that mean for you? Tell me on your performance report, when you stand in front of your boss, what is he or she measuring you on? And once I know those metrics, once I know how you're being measured, then potentially I can shift my product and my service into a line of discussion that shows you that we are going to help you achieve that faster, more consistently, more reliably. In the case of business and consumer, it's the same thing. What kind of makes you feel more secure? What are your fears in life? What potentially makes you feel better about your life? So in the case of buying a mortgage, is a bigger house going to make you feel better? Does it make you more prestigious among your friends? Does it make your spouse happier? Does it make your family, your children happier? In the case of insurance, again, what is your personal motivation there? Does that give you some peace of mind? Does it give you a good feeling to know that your family is taken care of in case something happens? So you have to look for that personal motivation and how they either personally or someone else measures them, and that often can create a sense of urgency in that sales. Number 3, authority objection. This is pretty common in both B2B and B2C, and that's when you get up to a point where they say, well, this all sounds good. I like it. It's interesting, but I need to check with someone else, right? I need to check with my boss. I need to check with the chief marketing officer. I need to check with the CEO. I need to check with my spouse. I need to talk to a couple friends and kind of see what they think. So these are authority objections. You're going to find out that you're not actually talking to the decision maker, the buyer, and that needs some special handling. So there's a couple things here that I always like to tell people to keep in mind. One, in all cases, as quickly as possible, try to deal directly with the buyer. So in a B2B setting, you want to make sure, if at all possible, that you're in front of someone who can actually make that decision. In a business to consumer situation, you want to make sure all the buyers are in the room if possible. You want to bring that spouse into the conversation. If there's someone, hey, I sort of, this individual gathers kind of the information, and then the other spouse actually makes the decision, that's important to know. And so you you want to figure out, again, through good questioning, what are those dynamics and how do I get the buyer in the room, or how do I get the two people or the multiple people into the room that actually will collaborate to make the decision. If for whatever reason, in the case of the spousal objection, this is pretty common. The one sort of functions as a buyer's assistant, right? They're the ones who gather the information, the resources. Maybe they're even the one that kind of understands the detail, but ultimately the other spouse needs to come on board and is a part of that decision-making cycle. Again, in a B2B setting, a lot of times you will have some people that are assisting executives to make that decision, gather that information, sort of boil it down to the key factors that are important to the decision maker. And again, that can happen the same way in business and consumer with those spousal situations. So what's important here is to kind of know the difference between a gatekeeper and a buyer's assistant. A buyer's assistant, you want to actually enable, you want to provide them the best resources, you want to actually help them sell to the buyer, or at least help them strategize how to get the buyer in the room so that you guys can all talk together. If it's a true gatekeeper, and that's, hey, I'm more comfortable brushing off salespeople on the phone, and that's why I answered, and you get a sense that they're just kind of keeping you busy until they can brush you off, then you want to identify that as a gatekeeper. And what a gatekeeper is they're actually trying to reduce or prevent information from getting to the buyer. You have the same situations in B2B. That person you don't want to enable. You're just wasting your time because, again, they're just trying to keep you away from that confrontation with the buyer or potentially getting to the buyer. So that's a different type of person. And again, this is something that you sort of filter out in your line of questioning. Is this person truly trying to help the buyer make a decision? In which case you guys are partners and you should kind of co-sell this into the buyer. If for whatever reason you get a sense that they're a gatekeeper and they're just kind of the one that's more comfortable with confrontation and brushing you off, then you kind of want to get out of that conversation as quickly as possible, because you're probably never going to actually get to the buyer if you run into a gatekeeper. And then you, again, this applies to the buyer's assistants. You want to grow their influence with the buyer with your experience. So a lot of times when I'm talking to a buyer's assistant, or I'm talking to a spouse, maybe in a financing a mortgage or something like that, then I'm actually trying to educate and equip that person to be more influential, to be more comfortable and confident with what I'm selling, so that when they do have that discussion with the buyer, or they try to coax them into a call or conversation with me, they're highly educated, that we've kind of bought them into my philosophy, and they're starting to kind of hear my presentation as a proxy between that person. And then I don't really like this tactic, but it is a tactic that actually works, and that is the ego tactic. So, just potentially appealing to that person's ego and trying to kind of pull them into a buying conversation. And again, this is one of those situations where I think you're kind of using an artificial tactic. So try to avoid this, but it is one to mention because a lot of people use it, and it does work from time to time. But this is one I would probably avoid. Number 4, competitor objection. So this is one of those situations where someone else is in the deal, or, hey, yeah, we're going with so-and-so, or we've, used so-and-so. One of the techniques I like to use here is to try to actually, again, through a line of questioning, get them to think about how that relationship is panning out to them, how it's paying off, what is the value of that current relationship, and could you potentially be a better option? So one of the easy questions is just simply kind of the Ronald Reagan question. Okay, but are you better off? And so that's pretty common. There's a couple different ways to kind of ask that question. One is the Net Promoter Score. And so this is just a single question, usually used in a survey, but sometimes I like to actually use it over the phone when I'm presenting and selling. And that is to simply ask, okay, I understand you're using so-and-so. Tell me, what, on a scale from 1 to 10, how likely are you to refer that person to one of your friends and family. And sometimes you'll get some weird answers, right? You would expect, oh, we're using that, then that should be a 10, right? But they'll say, oh, it's like a 5 or a 7. And then you can ask the follow-on questions. Why is that? Why didn't you not rank them a 10? Or what exactly is not going well in that relationship? And that gives you a wide open sort of entry point to start a sales conversation. So I love that question. And then you could just be straight up and just say, hey, are you better off today than you were when you started? And just ask them kind of the straight up question is, are you better off with whoever you're going with currently or who you're thinking about going with? And then another way to ask this, and this kind of puts it on a positive tone, gives you a little bit of information, but it also gets them to think, because a lot of times, like I said, it's not like a 10 as far as how happy they are with the relationship. It's just the relationship that they have, and it's potentially convenient, and they just thinking of all the hassle it is to kind of change. And so I like to ask the questions of, what do you love about them? And again, that gets them starting to think, what exactly is it that makes me want to not consider anybody else? And a lot of times this will break down, and you'll start to again, open an opportunity for you to have a discussion there as well. Number 5, the confused objection. And so oftentimes, this happens again, insurance, mortgage, all the time, is just simply the complexity of what you're offering in the product can kill the deal. And that complexity could actually come from the product or the scenario that kind of makes it fit, or it actually could be the complexity that you've generated in the way that you actually present the product. And so this can come from a different ways. So the first way I like to tackle this one is, can you simplify your solution? If you understand, or as you're going through your presentation, you get a sense that it's just kind of flying over the head of the prospect that you're talking to, then kind of step back and mentally refocus and say, hey, is there a way that I can kind of simplify the solution to my client? Is there a way that I can simplify the way I'm presenting it? Is there a way that I can present an analogy that just makes it easier for them to kind of understand and breaks down the complexity of what I'm presenting? Can you focus on specific themes? This is something that helps as well. So a lot of times a product or service will actually satisfy a bunch of different problems. It's a solution to 2 or 3 different problems. So let's think about refinancing. So potentially you could refinance to lower your payment. You could refinance because you actually want to reduce your payment by kind of stretching the mortgage out. You may want to refinance so you can actually pay your home off earlier. You may want to refinance because there's just simply a better rate right now. You may want to refinance such that you can take some equity out. So there's all kinds of different problems that potentially you solve. And so you want to start again with a line of questioning, running through all those different potential scenarios to see what is the right theme so that you can simplify it and you can just focus on that one theme. Tell stories of how you kind of simplified someone else's path to success. Stories a lot of times reduce the complexity because, one, it gets you thinking sort of in a simpler way and a more concrete way. So you're not trying to kind of cover all the bases, tell all the features, tell all the benefits. You're actually just focusing, hey, well, this is one client that I help. They sound a little bit like you, and you could just walk them through that story, and it gives it a nice, clear path to success, and they can kind of put themselves in their shoes. And again, hopefully you're matching up the scenarios, and that can reduce a lot of complexity. The reputation objection. Now, this can kind of come off in a couple of different ways. So this could be a bad experience they had just in the industry. Last time they got a mortgage, last time they got insurance. It could actually be a bad experience that they had with you, or a bad experience they heard about you. Maybe they saw a review or a listing or something online, and so they've already come into the conversation with a negative impression of you. So let's talk about a couple different ways to get and solve this one. One is just get to the root cause. Understand why they're coming into this conversation in a negative or defensive way. And you can hear it instantly on their voice. As soon as you introduce yourself, you can hear that when this is the particular problem. So I like to tell, if they actually say, hey, I try to get a sense of what the bad experiences is, and then I ask them to tell me a story. It's like, oh, like listen to the objection. Oh, yeah, that sounds kind of terrible, or that sounds like they kind of didn't do something right. Can you tell me more about what happened? And let them, one, vent and rant it out. That directs all the negative energy back on the bad experience and sort of away from you, and you gather a lot of intelligence about what went wrong the last time, and that's going to go into your next step. You want to, if it was just kind of, hey, that product or that process was different than what I do, and I have a better product or a better process, and so you won't have this mismatch or misfit, then I want to take in that information, and then I want to lay out a vision for a better process, or explain to them how they got, maybe because of a lack of experience of the last agent or the broker, they got put into the wrong product. And you're going to tell them sort of how you go through a process to make sure that they're in the right product and that they have a fit. The other thing, and why it's important to say, hey, tell me what happened and listen to the story, is there's a really good possibility that it was all them. And if it was about them misunderstanding expectations, simply being stubborn, or unrealistic about what they were trying to accomplish, then this is a perfect opportunity for you to cut the conversation and run. And so in this particular one, when there's a bad experience involved, you definitely want to ask some questions. You want to turn kind of the mic over to them and let them rant it out and give you all the information you need to figure out, hey, is this something that I can solve, that perhaps the other person or the situation was different and problematic, or is this actually a problem with the individual and they're just not going to be a good client for me? Number 7, the dinosaur objection. This is kind of an interesting one, and you get this occasionally. It's like, well, I don't believe in that, or hey, it's only a 30-year mortgage. That's what I do. There's no other options. Just a sense that, hey, this is the way I've done it in the past, and I'm kind of fixed in my way. I don't really want to hear anything innovative, anything new. There's a couple different ways here. First thing you want to assess is the client going to be a good fit? Immediately hearing kind of their reaction and their approach, you want to kind of think through, okay, is this going to fit? Is my product going to fit? Maybe you're selling them some sort of technology or innovative approach. If they're just not going to understand it or be able to kind of focus through how to use it, then maybe it's just not a fit. If they're just so stubborn that they're not even going to listen to what your approach is, and you don't have kind of the dinosaur version of that to offer, then again, it just might not be a good fit. That's always a fair question to ask. Is this client going to be a good fit? And then if you do think it is a good fit, and maybe it's just kind of a lack of education, people that kind of fit into that mold that say, hey, this is the way I do it, they potentially sort of created a philosophy around that part of their life, and it's just kind of worked for them over and over again. So really the best and only way to overcome this is to take them, and they usually are very logic-minded, is just take them through a set of data and logic that shows them a clear difference between the old way and the improvement that they'll gain by going through the new way, and just focus on facts. Again, usually these type of people are highly receptive to that. You just have to kind of logically step them through. And then goes back to this, sometimes people are just stuck in their ways and they're just simply not a good fit. So again, always a fair question. Is this going to be a client that fits with my product, that's going to fit with my business? And it's okay. We've got plenty of prospects out there, and so you should just kind of move on to the next one. All right, the final one, number 8, is the committee objection. And this is a situation where it's not quite like the authority situation. This is often someone who is the buyer, who is an authority, but they need to circle a committee around them and make them feel confident in their decision. And that's usually the thing that's missing here. And this one can be pretty challenging because you just don't know where you ever stand. You never kind of know whether they're going to make a decision. These are typically indecisive people, people that lack some confidence in what they're trying to do, or just in general in life. And this can be a real danger zone because you don't know who this committee is going to be. On a B2B side, a lot of times it's a little bit easier to kind of identify because it is a true committee, a body that makes these kind of decisions and helps. If it's just the team around a senior leader, that can be a little more nebulous. This is really hard and really challenging, and I think probably the most dangerous when you're talking about business to consumer, because this is a person that's just got to ask all of his friends and family, all of their random opinions about a bunch of stuff they probably don't know. So if you're in the insurance or mortgage industry, you know who these kind of people are. They're going to ask, their brother-in-law who, bought a house 7 years ago or whatever, and they're going to give them all kinds of weirdo information. Same goes with insurance. So once you're bringing those kind of friends and family from random places in, and they're always going to say, oh, well, yeah, my uncle now does insurance, so you're going to get all that kind of weirdness. So this is pretty much a danger zone. The other thing you have to filter through is it truly a committee, or maybe, again, you ran into a buyer's assistant? Or is it a gatekeeper? Again, you might have run into a gatekeeper here, but mostly what I'm talking about, and you can identify these, is the person that's got to ask everybody and probably will never actually make a decision because it's kind of freaks them out. The wannabe is another situation. They just kind of think they know everything, but again, you identify really early on that actually that front is essentially protection for their lack of confidence in the deal. So the only way really to get through this is to ask a bunch of questions. And figure out yeah, that's fine. There's a lot of people you need to talk to, but what is it that you need to understand or gain in order to make a purchase decision? What is that process? What are the questions you're going to ask your friends? And what exactly is that going to look like? And then ultimately, how will you make that decision? And then try to, again, find out who the buyer is and make sure that it is this person. Again, a lot of confusion can happen in this particular scenario because you can't tell, is there a lack of confidence or they're just truly not the buyer. And then if possible, who's on the team? Like, who are you going to consult? Who are you going to talk to? And get an understanding of kind of how that works. And potentially, can you bring some of those people into the mix? I mean, potentially it could turn into a whole bunch of referrals, but again, it's kind of a messy situation that you want to sort through, but asking questions is the best way to get through that. And then ultimately, again, my favorite question, the mental question that you need to process on every single call is this client a good fit for our company, our product, for me as an individual salesperson? So there you have it. Those are 8 common objections. And again, I didn't try to answer those in sort of a scripted way, but just give you an understanding of why the objection is happening, and then break down some different strategies and tactics to overcome that. Hopefully that was helpful. If it was, if you enjoyed that video, we would love for you to give it a thumbs up. That does 2 important things for us. 1, it actually helps that video get out to more people that we can help. And 2, it actually gives us the support we need to continue to make episodes each and every week. So would appreciate that. If you like this kind of sales training, we have a ton of videos, and we would encourage you to subscribe to our channel so that you can get the future ones. And also hit that little bell, which will notify you each and every time we post a new one of these sales training videos, which we do each and every week. So hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll see you next week.